16 shots, you're full auto only.
We'll start by taking a look at the magazine. This uses 10 by 18mm shells. These side pieces go together something like that to allow enough space for the shell to move. They also have to be wide enough to give just a little bit of clearance. So glue the front edge of the magazine first. Draw a line where this piece will glue, again making sure that there's a bit of tolerance. There we go. Notice how this piece is not aligned with this edge. It's inset by about 6mm. Next up, make the feed lips. You can get a single piece of 3mm ply, make a 45-degree cut, and trim them down to about 12mm long. You can glue the other feed lip in, and then glue the other side plate down, making sure that those feed lips are nicely aligned. We'll have a look at the side plates. Now, these ones are 3mm ply, and they're cut out pretty normally. We've got all the screw holes in the left side plate, and this hole here be drilled big enough so that some 10mm dowel can fit snugly, because friction alone will control the selector switch. As for these side plates, they're a little bit different because there's one template for each plate. I didn't cut them out at the same time. These are 6mm ply, and we have blind holes here, and a pin should fit loosely in those holes. And now this is actually the inside of the side plate. So again, we've got the screw holes on the left side, and it'll go together like that. Notice the ejection port is also on the left side. That's because I actually want to see the shells a bit better. But you can put it on the right side if you really want to. We'll have a look at the 3 25mm thick pieces. So first off, we've got the barrel trunnion. That is just a block of wood with a hole drilled through it. I'd suggest drilling that hole to suit 19 or 16mm dowel. Next we've got the rear trunnion that holds the stock, and there's 2 holes for screws. And then there's this piece that goes in the receiver. You could actually cut that out of 12mm thick wood. That might be easier. It's got this little cutout and sort of a ramp shape here. A bolt is a bit of a pain to cut out, but this template can be stuck onto 19mm pine, and once you've cut that shape out, you can glue the left template onto there. It's best to cut the moving parts out of plastic. I'm using HDPE, and I've stuck the template down with double-sided tape. To maximise precision, I'm using a drilling guide to drill all these holes. The issue with polyethylene is you get these fibres that don't really want to come off if you use a file, so you'll need to shape that with either a small snap-off blade knife or a chisel. So what you can do is use the top of the vise to guide your chisel. If that chisel just cuts along the top of the vise, nice and precise. We'll start assembling the frame by gluing this piece and this piece onto the right side plate. Up next, you can put a pin through that hole to help you align this piece, because that piece controls the trigger travel. You may need to take some material off until that trigger slides smoothly, like so. Once this piece is glued, you can also glue this block in, of course making sure that it's compatible with the trigger. There's a whole bunch of teeny tiny little parts that go into the trigger, but the first one is to glue this block in with a hole for a fairly short fairly soft compression spring. Next up, screw a very light duty extension spring into those two small holes. When the hammer is cocked, pull the trigger, the hammer is free to move back, move forward, and be caught by the semi-autos here where it locks until the trigger's released, and then it's ready to fire again. This hole at the end of the lever is for some extra weight to slow the rate of fire. In this case I'll be using some double out buckshot. I'll probably just hammer that in place. You can start gluing the side plates together using that pin to help align them. So like the real Thompson, this one uses a rail to interface with the receiver. Glue the magazine rail, making sure it's right in the middle. You can also glue the barrel trunnion. Put the barrel in place to make this easier to align. Open up the receiver and link the toggle action together. So I've got a pin over here, little screw over here, and some spacers down here. So to test it, I've sprung that hammer just with a rubber band. And it works nicely. So now I have to get a coil spring that gives me about the same tension. Start the selector by cutting a slot into your 10mm dowel and gluing in a little paddle. Next up, make the cutout for the semi-auto sear. You can see now that cutout, there's enough room to not interfere with that sear, because in full auto mode it actually blocks the sear. Time to drill and pin that selector switch in place. The magazine catch is made from 6mm ply. You can see there's a little hole in there for a small compression spring. Once that's done, you can glue on this tab that interfaces with it. The selector switch plate serves two functions. The second one is to act as an over travel stop for the switch. Make sure that crescent is cut to clear the switch. Pistol grip is made of 3 pieces, and that is so it goes around the receiver, and then it's just held in place by a pin. As for the stock, that's attached to this block, which I suggest fitting that first and then gluing the block into the receiver. Front grip has a little tenon that can be cut and glued in place. As for the barrel, I've turned mine, but you can make it out of 16mm dowel, and the front sight is about 22mm wide, and that can just be glued in there nice and strong, and then you glue the barrel into the trunnion. 2 holes, one into the trunnion, one into the barrel. That will line up with 2 screws and a little spacer there. The ejector is simply a curved ramp of wood, but make sure it works properly before you glue it in. So the drum magazine is a lot better. It has the winder over here, which I think is more out of the way. It's also got a pin to hold it in place, because for some reason the drum wouldn't lock in using, you can see in there, that little angled piece. It works like a French cleat. Follower goes in the right way, and in this little hole put a screw that needs to protrude just a little bit. Now, as for this little pulley wheel, I made these on a lathe, but you don't need a lathe to do this. It can be made just with a drill. Put some photos to show that process. Now, these handmade wheels need to be pretty loose, else they tend to bind up. A piece of hat elastic is perfect for the magazine spring. Got a knot at one end, a loop at the other, and a loop hooks onto the follower, goes around the pulley, and then at the bottom There's just a little slot sawn into the drum. And you press it in that slot, should stay there pretty well. As for the shells, these are made from 10mm diameter aluminium tube. And the reason they have that slot cut is so they make that sound. They're 18mm long, so it's a nice convenient size. To load it, you can again use that screw on the follower to pull it down. Now that's fully loaded with 14 shots, but you'll notice I could still actually fit one more round in. However, when you load it, the bolt will actually push down on that top shell, so you need that little bit of wiggle room. If I show you the receiver, you can more easily see how those magazines lock in. So the stick just uses that French cleat, but the drum uses the now redundant French cleat and also a pin, just like that.